Hi folks, thanks for tuning in. In this video, we're talking about what is law. I'll tell you what I think law is. I'll give you a few nuggets to know about law. I'll point you to some more resources. This is to get you started. See those disclaimers. We are all familiar with rules. We got rules all around us. Our parents, those who raised us, had rules for us we had to follow. School has rules. Our workplace has rules. We all are familiar with that. So think of law as just a type of rule that comes from the government. This is the simplest way I can explain it. I think it's really helpful for students to think of it this way. So law is simply a rule that comes from government. This, to me, simplest way to break it down. So what is law as a concept? Well, let's layer in a little more information. Law is a vast area of government rules for conduct and a process for resolving disputes. What's conduct? Conduct is how we should behave, the things we should do, but mostly a lot of laws are about the things we should not do. And then a process for resolving disputes. People disagree about something. We need a process that's fair and peaceful to resolve that disagreement. This is how I defined it for my book on Cyberlaw from the glossary. Now here's a quick side note. Sometimes people ask, hey, what is a law? And by that, sometimes they mean, what is a statute? Or where do laws come from? Right? Laws come from statutes. I'm going to talk about that right now. Law comes from judges when they issue a decision in a case decision. That can have precedent. But law as a statute, we might call that a duly enacted law. That's a bill that got passed by the legislature and signed into law by the executive, meaning president of the country or governor of a state. And that's how I define that in my book too. And that is not really the focus of this video, but wanted to put it out there so we're not confused by two different ways to use that term. So law is a large body of government rules for conduct and a process for resolving disputes. So government rules, that's key term. Conduct, that's key, how to behave, mostly what not to do. And a process for resolving disputes. And the disputes happen because one person or entity claims that another person violated one of those rules for conduct. So we want to have a process to resolve that dispute, because just because someone says someone violated a rule doesn't mean they did. And if they did, we want to know, hey, what should the consequence be for violating the rule? So there are many areas of law. There are many laws about how people should behave, what they should do or not do. There are a lot of laws about what happens if someone breaks those rules, meaning if one person or entity claims another broke the rule. We want a process to resolve those disputes. Laws come from a lot of different places. Some come from our federal government. Some come from each state government. And they can come through that legislative process I mentioned, or they can come from courts. And there's a regulatory process too, but I don't want to get too deep into the details in this video. Here's an important way to categorize law, and that is whether it is civil or criminal. I think that's the first category of law you should know and be able to identify. So if we think of all law as being in that green box, well, some of that law is criminal, some of that law is civil. Let's figure out which is which when we hear about law in the news or read about it. Criminal law, put really simply, is the area of law where police could arrest someone for violating it. And civil law, again, real simple, is an area of law where police cannot arrest someone for violating it. And there are a lot of areas of civil law. This, to me, is the simplest way to explain the difference between criminal and civil law. I dive into it in more detail in another video. Here's another thing to think about when we're talking about law. We can divide it into whether it is substantive law or procedural law. Now, real simple, substantive law is the area law that specifies the rules for conduct. Mostly it's what not to do. Sometimes it is what you need to do. And procedural law is the area law that sets forth the process, the procedure, when one person or entity, and they would be a party to the litigation, alleges the other violated a rule of conduct. So in criminal law, there's a law that says don't do all these things, and the procedure lays out what happens if police arrest someone and say they violated the criminal law, and then the prosecutors conduct that litigation. What is the process for all of that? So putting these two categories together, if we've got criminal law and civil law, now we know criminal law has both those substantive law provisions and the procedural law provisions, and we can say the same for civil law. There are substantive provisions, and there are so many areas of civil law, and then there are the procedural laws for the process to resolve that civil dispute. Now let's talk about theory versus practice, the good, the bad, the ugly. Let's talk about the good, which is the theory of law, which is beautiful, that these rules apply to everyone, even powerful people and rich people. There's a process to resolve disputes peacefully based on rules and process, not based on power, money, corruption, or might makes right. We don't have to have a fight about it. We don't have to get a posse together. We have a process, and no person, no individual is above the law. Now here's the bad, or let's not call it bad, let's call it less good. This is the reality of law. And the first reality is even reasonable people will disagree. And you're going to see this disagreement when people talk about criminal cases in the news. Reasonable people will disagree. And not every person is reasonable. There are a lot of unreasonable people in this world, and they are really going to disagree. Now, in the practice of law, a lot of law is simply about winning. It's about persuasion, persuading the judge, the jury, sometimes even spin and manipulation. Lawyers are paid by each side to try to win. Now, within the bounds of ethics and the law is where they need to play, but some sides, they spend a lot of money and time to win. It's not always pretty. Sometimes people step outside those bounds of ethics and law. Wealthy and powerful can get a better result in a litigation. Wealthy and powerful can influence what the laws are. They can shape the laws, and sometimes that's not for the greater good, but their own good. Now, one caveat in here. Government prosecutors are not there just to win. Government prosecutors are there. Their job is not just to win. Their job is to do justice, what is fair. Now, I know we can disagree about whether they are achieving that or honestly trying for justice, but that is their job, not just to win. They are different from other lawyers in the practice of law. All right, here is the ugly. Our national laws and system of law can be damaged. It can even be corrupted in ways that are small, and for individual cases or small areas, and even for large. There can be corruption in police, even prosecutors and judges. There can be manipulation of the system at large. There can be the appointment of judges and prosecutors just to get specific results and not to do justice overall or in specific cases. All right, in conclusion, law is rules from the government. It's rules for conduct, meaning how to behave. Call that substantive laws. It's rules for the process to resolve that legal dispute, and that is procedural law. There are two main areas to know. There's criminal law, there's civil law. And that is the basics. If you want a deeper understanding, please see my additional resources, videos I built out and will build out, and these other references. And I'll put this in the video description. I got a short article on law in the U.S., Introduction to Law Things to Know. I got an online course on Introduction to Law. I have a book on Cyberlaw that includes a substantial introduction to law. And someday I'm going to write a book just on an introduction to law. Check out my disclaimers. This is not legal advice. And thanks so much for watching and listening.